Namaskar. Well, Sri Lanka's newly elected president, Gotbhaya Rajapaksa, delivered a measured speech on Monday at his swearing-in ceremony, and he said that his country will maintain friendly ties with all nations and remain neutral in matters involving international powers so as to stay out of conflicts. Sri Lanka has historically been an important commercial hub along with the maritime routes due to its strategic positioning in the Indian Ocean, and China has increasingly made inroads there, raising concerns for India. But Rajapaksa had trounced his nearest rival, Sajith Premadasa, by a margin of over 13 lakh votes. 52.25% of the votes he had polled against 41.99% for Premadasa. Rajapaksa also pledged to support the UN's Sustainable Development Goals and make Sri Lanka one of the leading countries in sustainable development. So let's take a look now at Sri Lanka's new president. Who exactly is Gotbhaya Rajapaksa? We'll get some graphics up on the board and we will try and explain to you what exactly and how he has in terms of what he brings to the table as a president. And we are going to have this right now. He is 70 years old and he's best known also as the man who crushed the Tamil Tigers. So he was actually the defense secretary when his brother Mahinda Rajapaksa was the president, and he led that military campaign against the LTTE between 2007 and 2009. And he was actually also a US citizen, but he renounced his US citizenship to contest the presidential elections. So he was Sri Lanka's defense secretary when his brother Mahinda Rajapaksa was president, and he also led that military campaign against the LTT. It happened between 2007 and 2009. So he has a military background. He was once a US citizen, but had renounced his US citizenship to contest the presidential elections. So, well, he considers himself, he's more of a national security expert than a conventional president. That's the way analysts look at him. India would be closely watching Sri Lanka's relationship with China because China had got huge concessions when Mahinda Rajapaksa was the president. In fact, the Chinese military submarines and their warships had made several undeclared visits to the Colombo port, and India had raised several concerns with Gotbhaya then when he was the defense secretary. So Rajapaksa had accused India also of effecting a regime change in Sri Lanka when Mahinda Rajapaksa lost the election to Sirisena. Sri Lanka's peace was shattered by near-simultaneous suicide bomb attacks on Easter Sunday this year, killing 269 people. Local Islamist suicide bombers blew themselves up in three churches, also in 3 tourist hotels, and those attacks exposed religious extremism and serious shortcomings in the security and intelligence apparatus in that country. So perhaps the Sri Lankans have voted for somebody who can handle all that because India had shared intelligence with Sri Lanka, very specific intelligence about these attacks. Now, the Prime Minister has congratulated Rajapaksa. Congratulations, Gotbhaya Rajapaksa, is what the Prime Minister said, on your victory. I look forward to working closely with you for deepening the close and fraternal ties between our two countries and citizens, and for peace, prosperity, as well as security in our region. I also congratulate the people of Sri Lanka for the successful conduct of the elections. The Prime Minister also telephoned Gotbhaya Rajapaksa and congratulated him. So Gotbhaya Rajapaksa immediately tweeted back. He thanked the Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, and also the people of India for their warm wishes. And he said that the two nations are bound by history and common beliefs, and he looks forward to strengthening the relationship and meeting the Prime Minister in the near future. So we're going to discuss all this now with our guests in the studio. We have with us Mohan Kumar, who had served in the Indian High Commission in Sri Lanka, and we also have Harshvardhan Pant, who's a distinguished fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us. Ambassador Mohan Kumar, how would you look at the Rajapaksas returning to power in Sri Lanka? Should India be concerned about this?
So, I don't believe this particular result was unexpected.
Yes.
That is because security and economics dominated these elections. I think you rightly referred to the Easter blasts, and I think that incident had a profound impact, I believe, on the outcome of the elections. People were scared of going back to the bad old days. They wanted stability in Sri Lanka. So there was a natural inclination to vote for a strong man like Gotbhaya. The second reason is also economics, because in Sri Lanka, because it's a small country, security and economics are inextricably tied. You cannot have tourism and other things prosper in a country where you have the problem of terrorism. So that, I think those two factors were primarily responsible for the outcome. I don't believe India should be unduly concerned. In fact, I have been a proponent of India's neighborhood policy, which focuses on issues rather than leaders. Right. Whether it's Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, I think we should stop focusing on who's the president, who's the prime minister.
Absolutely.
Look at how our interests can be pursued in those countries. So I don't believe we should be unduly concerned.
Professor Harshpant, India's overall development commitment is about $3 billion in Sri Lanka, and more than $560 million is in grants. India has done a lot of good work there. We built 50,000 houses in the affected areas because of the conflict that took place for a very long time between the Tamil Tigers and the Sri Lankan administration or authorities. So, what would you say? What would you think? I mean, India is deeply invested in Sri Lanka, and perhaps our relationship is quite widespread, and really one shouldn't be concerned with who the leadership is.
Well, I agree. I think we are extensively invested in Sri Lanka, and Sri Lanka is extensively invested in India, as two neighbors should be. And I think whether a third party has trade ties or economic ties is something that India cannot and should not control or should not have a veto on. I think Sri Lanka should be free to have a relationship with other countries as it deems fit. Clearly, there are certain red lines for India which India will pursue and has continued to pursue over the last few years. But if you see the extensive engagement that India has had, even with the Rajapaksas, for example, in the last 2 to 3 years, that has been very visible, that we have reached out to all kinds of political entities in Sri Lanka, and we have engaged with them. So clearly there are certain issues on which there have been certain problems in the past, but here is a new president starting a new journey as far as Sri Lanka is concerned, and clearly the people of Sri Lanka have given him a mandate based on all the factors that Ambassador Kumar just mentioned. There is a clear recognition that I think whatever other things the previous administration may have done, it seems to be relatively incompetent in delivering governance, and that has been a pervasive sense across Sri Lanka for the last few years, and perhaps that's something that has propelled Rajapaksa back, or the Rajapaksa clan back to power in Sri Lanka, and we would see how that pans out. But at the moment, I don't see India having India unduly concerned about it. I think it's a new phase in Indo-Sri Lankan ties, and we look forward to and I think Indian government should be looking forward to engaging with Sri Lanka as an equal, as it has done in the past. So I think Rajapaksa himself has alluded to this fact, that he is looking forward to engaging with India as a friendly country, and Prime Minister was the first one to congratulate him. So I think clearly there is a sense in both capitals that we need a new beginning in the relationship with a new government in place in Colombo.
Mr. Mohan Kumar, is it a new Rajapaksa taking over as the president, or is it the Rajapaksa clan that is coming back in a sense? Because when Mahinda Rajapaksa was the president, all the four brothers held important positions, and are we likely to see something like that once again?
So it's important to understand that traditionally Sri Lanka was a two-party kind of setup, with SLFP and UNP power alternating between the two parties. What you now have is a new formation, SLPP, which is the party set up by the Rajapaksa clan, as you call it. But this is also a new political party because they're focusing on the non-English speaking elite, the lower class, the lower middle class, etc. in Sri Lanka. A lot of political churning going on in Sri Lanka, and I see this particular election as being significant from a very social point of view as well. But as far as your question goes, I do believe they would have learnt the lessons. I mean, his younger brother was, I think, in power. He was the defense secretary. I think they have learnt some of the mistakes they have made. I also believe that they believe
His older brother, Mahendra Rajapaksa, is the older brother.
Right, I'm sorry, yes,
Yeah, that's
older
right.
brother. So
Yeah.
I think they probably have learnt the lessons. I think they want equal relationship, as Professor Pant said, with India, but with other countries. I also believe that the fact that we have invited him to India immediately
Yes.
and that he has accepted, I believe we should start with a clean slate, frankly.
Professor Pant, the Sinhalese are dominant, obviously. They are about 75% of the population. But, this was a kind of a vote where really the Sinhalas backed Rajapaksa, but the rest of the country seemed to be backing the other candidate. Is it, very polarized in a sense? And does that augur well for the country?
Well, I think yes, that is going to be a big challenge, and I think perhaps the most significant challenge for Gotbhaya Rajapaksa, because he is entering into office with the sense that the minority seems to have voted for his opponent, and therefore the polarization that we see in Sri Lankan society today does not augur well for the future of Sri Lanka and for the future of I think of a new government that is coming to power. So I think for him, and I think he made the right noises. He said, well, I have to be the president, or I should be the president for all who vote, even those who did not vote for me. So clearly he knows the challenge that he's facing, and I think unless there is some kind of reconciliation, unless there is some forward movement on the issues that divide Sri Lanka, it would be very difficult to achieve the kind of goals that he has set out for himself. So I think for him, largely the issues are going to be domestic reconciliation, reaching out to those minorities who have not voted for him in this election. Yes. And again, that's an area where India would be an important interlocutor for him, can potentially be an important interlocutor for him, as I think the ground realities pan out over the next few months and years. So clearly the challenges are there in the domestic realm, in the social realm, which are quite huge, quite extensive, and especially because he comes with the baggage. He comes with that historical legacy of him leading the charge on the LTTE and the kind of brutality and human rights issues that were raised and that continue to be raised about his tenure.
Right, and India is invested quite a lot actually in the minorities in a sense because of the India's commitments to rehabilitation for the Tamils, and to what extent can that help the relationship between India and the Rajapaksa government now going ahead? Because India has already built, 50,000 houses. India has built auditoriums. India has helped in the education sector. So a lot of it is actually in the reconstruction, in a sense, of areas that were destroyed during that war between 2007 and 2009. Mr. Mohan Kumar.
Yes, so I believe India has to walk a very fine line here. You don't want to be seen to be interfering in the internal affairs of Sri Lanka, and yet Sri Lanka knows this well, that we are an important stakeholder, at least we were an important stakeholder. We continue to look out for the welfare of the minorities in Sri Lanka, but I do believe our approach now has changed, let's say compared to 20 years ago, when we were interested in politically intervening in Sri Lanka. Now the way we do it is we try to intervene in the form of aid, as Professor Pant said, for development and reconstruction of the Northeast. So I think we will continue to do that while we carefully nudge the new government that reconciliation with the Tamils is really in their enlightened self-interest. I believe that should be our policy.
Professor Pant, so let's come to the China issue then, because what did the Rajapaksas do when they were in power the last time? They sort of took lots of big loans from China, and as a result of that, they had to give away the Hampantota port for 99 years as a lease. Now that should have gone down pretty badly actually with the electorate in a sense, because India's aid on the other hand is not subject to these kind of realities. So one would look at it, as China perhaps is looking at a positioning of, and that could be dangerous in a sense, or that could change the state of play in the region. So all other countries need to actually notice the Chinese investments in Sri Lanka.
Well, in some ways, the word debt trap originated in the Sri Lankan context. So I think clearly there is a larger issue here about Chinese investments in smaller countries and how that has trapped these countries into enormous debt, and how that is not allowing these countries to achieve their full potential. So that is a challenge that I think all smaller countries are facing, a lot of the smaller countries are facing with regard to Chinese aid and infrastructure investment is concerned. But I think in particular in the case of Sri Lanka, what is very interesting is how this has been sort of a roller coaster between various political entities. You recall that it was under the Mahindra Rajapaksa regime that China became such a big stakeholder in the economic development of Sri Lanka, and then Chinese economic investments became very, very prominent, and you had these big ticket items like the Hambantota or the airport, which are basically white elephants, which have emerged to be white elephants. But if you then go to the Sirisena government, I mean, they could not actually do much about it because they were so trapped by the Chinese investment mechanisms that it was very little that they could do. So clearly the Sirisena, again, the kind of deal, the 99-year lease that was struck was under Sirisena government, and at that time actually Gotbhaya Rajapaksa criticized the deal. He said that I'm not in favor of what the Sirisena government is doing. Okay. So clearly I think the China factor is very interesting, and we will see how it pans out. But I think some lessons have been learned, and because it happened under Rajapaksa's watch, under his elder brother's watch, perhaps is more important for the new administration now to take a call. But I think there is a larger point here that, look, all our neighbors will use the China card as and when they deem fit. It will sort of, it's not that particular political entities play it. All governments, irrespective of the political color, have played it in India's neighborhood, and that is something that perhaps all smaller states do. When you have two major powers on their borders, they try to see what best advantage they can get from these two major powers by playing one off against the other. So clearly there's something that they will continue to do, and China is such a big actor now that I don't think any neighbor of India would be willing to cede, would be willing to look away from that fact. So, but I think what we are looking at now is how smartly you can deal with the Chinese investment, and how smartly you can manage China and India at the same time.
But Ambassador Mohan Kumar, the ties that India has with Sri Lanka are ancient. They are civilizational. We virtually are similar civilizations. We have the same interests. There's Buddhism, which is extremely important, and the Rajapaksas are Buddhists, and so what do you think? I mean, culturally, do we see some sort of an impetus that can be built between the relationship between India and Sri Lanka under the current administration?
You are already beginning to hear some voices from the newly elected government of Sri Lanka that India is a relative while China is a friend. So you will have those kinds of views coming out. India has had, as you say, civilizational ties with Sri Lanka. They should continue afoot. I would judge Sri Lanka by its actions. For example, going back to the China case, I mean, Sri Lanka is part of the Belt and Road Initiative.
Right.
And the two of the big projects that are part of the Belt and Road Initiative, one is the Hambantota port, the other is this project which is going to make Colombo the financial hub of South Asia, or at least Asia. So it pretends to be Asia, but actually South Asia most certainly. Now those things, as Professor Pant rightly hints, you really can't object to. But if there are actions by Sri Lanka which impinge on the fundamental security interests of India, I would then make it a point to talk to them privately and see how they react to it. But otherwise, my own sense is that there has been a certain sobering exercise in Sri Lanka as well, vis-a-vis other players, especially China. So I personally think we should be off to a good start with the new president, as long as we start with a clean slate.
And off to a good start, speaking about that, Professor Pant, after the Easter Sunday bombings, terrorism has come into focus, and India is playing a lead role actually in counter-terrorism efforts across the world. And India, of course, gave Sri Lanka tangible evidence, actionable intelligence, and Sri Lanka didn't act. So perhaps, I was saying that even in the introduction, the voters probably had that in mind, that they wanted a government which can act. And Rajapaksa is known to be somebody who's an expert in national security. So from that point of view, India and Sri Lanka can develop much closer ties.
Yes, I think Easter Sunday bombings perhaps were the meta narrative of this election, because they somehow signified the incompetence of the previous administration and also the ability of Rajapaksas to deliver. And when you had this this reportage coming out of Sri Lanka that look, there was intelligence inputs being given to Sri Lanka, and India also played a very important role. Despite that, the administration was busy with infighting. I think that sent out a message to the electorate that they needed someone who can actually take charge, and I think people under such circumstances feel vulnerable. So perhaps this is a vote for as you point out, a person who can achieve results on the ground. And Gotbhaya Rajapaksa's previous tenure as defense secretary is we know him for the vicious battle against the LTT, and how the sense that he won that victory over the Tamil Tigers. So clearly, I think people have voted for a sense of of better governance and better security for themselves, and that I think is something that you cannot really criticize the electorate for. So certainly, I think Sri Lankans have voted for a new regime, and hopefully it will be a better start for not only for Sri Lankans themselves, but also for Indo-Sri Lankan ties.
And talking about India and Sri Lanka being relatives, Mr. Mohan Kumar, Ambassador Mohan Kumar, also India's culture and the importance that India, is attaching to collaboration in terms of education, connectivity, small and medium enterprises. And India has built this 1,500 seat auditorium. It's named after Rabindranath Tagore. So you see, these symbols are also extremely important in conveying the relationship and the closeness that our country has with Sri Lanka, and that can only let's say enhance the relationship over time.
Yes, we will have to focus a lot more on enhancing these cultural ties. Different sections of Sri Lanka look at different aspects of Indian culture. The Tamils obviously look forward to Tamil Nadu, and that's fine. And the Sinhalese look to the North Indian part of the Indian culture. And I think the Indian Cultural Center, as you say, in Colombo, the Rabindranath Tagore Center, can play a very active role. But to me, the more important thing is taking the economic relationship to the next level. I think we've now been a little bit stuck on the FTA that we signed with Sri Lanka. It was one of the first countries with which we signed the FTA. A runaway success, actually, because our record with other FTAs has not been so great. But now I think it's time to really enlarge this FTA into something of a comprehensive economic partnership agreement, which includes investment and so on. So I would focus on that issue so that we can bring the countries closer together.
Ambassador Mohan Kumar and Professor Harshpan, thank you very much for being with us on this special program. And moving on then, well, analysts feel that India is too important a neighbor for Sri Lanka to neglect. India's relations cover much more than development assistance. It includes education, health, SMEs, culture, and much more. Now, China has got huge concessions. When Mahinda Rajapaksa was the president, Beijing, in fact, had extended loans worth billions of dollars. However, the huge Chinese loans had sparked concerns globally after Sri Lanka handed over its strategic Hambantota port to a state-run Chinese company, and that happened in 2017 for 99 years. And that was a debt swap which amounted to 1.2 billion US dollars. So, well, the Colombo port project is also being funded by China. So India is definitely a relative, as Ambassador Mohan Kumar says. At least that's what Mahinda Rajapaksa has been making that statement, and maybe China is a friend. So we need to look at it in that larger context. Thanks very much for watching. Namaskar.